some very significant developments with regard to our State Department. So they were required by Congress to issue a report, basically to say, hey, you know, we have this Leahy law that says you can't be supplying weapons to countries that are committing war crimes and blocking aid. It sure seems like we are supplying weapons to a country in Israel that is blocking aid and committing war crimes. So the State Department was compelled by Congress to produce this report. First, they delayed the report. Then they dropped it Friday evening. Classic move, right? And in it, they tried to use this diplomatic speak to be like, well, they're probably maybe doing a little war crimes, but we can't be sure, so it's all fine. We're just going to continue to ship the weapons. Here is Tony Blinken explaining the findings in this report on a Sunday talk show over the weekend. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Your national security memorandum that you signed says Israeli civilian harm mitigation efforts are, quote, inconsistent, ineffective, and inadequate. The prime minister himself said Israel assesses the IDF killed 14,000 terrorists and 16,000 civilians. Does the U.S. share the Israeli assessment that more civilians have been killed than actual terrorists?
Yes, we do. And I think the report makes clear that while Israel has processes, procedures, rules, regulations to try to minimize civilian harm, given the impact that this operation, this war in Gaza has had on the civilian population.
And yet you're still surging weapons to Israel.
Those have not been applied consistently and effectively. There's a gap between the stated intent and some of the results we've seen. But because it's so complicated, in the midst of a war, and particularly in the midst of a war where you have an enemy that hides in civilian infrastructure, hides behind civilians, to make final determinations on these individual incidents. We're looking at the totality of what's happened. We think it's reasonable to assess, based on what's happened, that there have been acts that have been inconsistent with Israel's obligations under international humanitarian law, but we haven't drawn definitive conclusions. We need to pursue these investigations, just as Israel is doing itself.
Yeah, I'm sure we really trust the results of the Israeli investigations here.
Okay, but here's the best part, Krystal. It took them a matter of 20 days to determine that the Russians were committing war crimes in Ukraine.
Great point.
Afterwards. How many U.S. observers, well, I'm sure there's plenty of CIA people who were on the ground, but in terms of people that we were trusting, we just take the Ukrainians' word for it, and we're like, yep, rubber stamp, here we go. So it's like, well, what about this? We have 10 times more documentation on this, and our weapons aren't even the ones that are being involved, where you legally have the obligation to make sure that it's not happening. You've had 7 months now at this point. It's all literally on tape. I mean, you know, how many more could you ask for? Or this entire law is fake and we just give weapons to who we want to. Now, but I'm actually fine with that. But it's the moral preening about all of this that drives me nuts. Russia's committing a genocide against Ukraine. Remember how they reacted to Bucha? Now, I'm not justifying or saying that it was a good thing, but that was like the biggest event on the planet. That doesn't even equal like a day of combat in Khan Yunis or a low-level military operation by the IDF. So which is it, folks? Which are we going with?
That's right.
You know, we can't, it's like these people are so full of shit on this matter. Like, it drives me absolutely nuts because it is clear that the moral language of the U.S. means nothing. Again, I'm fine with that because I don't think it should be there. But if we are going to apply it, then it should properly and be equally applied to everyone. Instead, we have selective application, which further isolates the United States and makes it much more difficult for us to conduct foreign policy abroad, as we are watching with our dwindling relationship with the entire world over this one issue with the country that is like number 50 on our trading list and is not all that important to us at all. And instead, it's like the 51st state. I don't get it.
It's important to these presidential candidates and their, fundraising committees. It's important to them. And Biden in particular has an ideological, I think you have to conclude at this point, a hardcore ideological commitment to Israel, to the extent that he is actually willing to risk Trump getting reelected and losing his reelection bid in order to stand solidly by their side. But it's just so naked, it's so obvious what they're doing here. They know. We just had one of our own American aid workers who was targeted and murdered by the Israelis. And we know lots about that. We know that they triple tapped that convoy. We know they went in and drone strike the first one and then drone strike the second one when the survivors crawled to it, and then drone strike the third car as well. I mean, We know many things about what's going on here. And by the way, they're under an obligation in the development of these reports to also consider independent organizations that have been on the ground who have routinely assessed that war crimes are being committed as a matter of course. You know, the World Central Kitchen aid workers just being one among them. So it's just so clear that they know that. They know that. They're not fools. They see what's going on, but they don't want to stop shipping the weapons. So they put in this little Weasley language about, maybe something's going on. But, you know, the Israelis they're investigating it, and they're looking into measures of accountability. And, you know, it's fog of war. Like, we really can't say. This has been what we've seen from the beginning, Saagar, with regard to Russia, is when it was Russia, there was no fog of war. It was very clear. It was very black and white. This was a war crime. This is genocide. We know what those things mean. We're able to talk about it from the podium. When it came to Israel, it was like, what even is a war crime, and who can really say? And it's going to take months before we even know. And we'll get back to you. We're going to do an investigation into that, but we're not really going to do an investigation. We're going to pretend we're doing it. We'll get back to you, probably never. So this is the sort of like written version of that approach of the Biden administration from the beginning of this war. There was another piece that was interesting from Tony Blinken that I wanted to bring to you, which relates to what we were talking about before with regard to Rafah and the idea that, this is how we'll really finish off Hamas, et cetera. Even Tony Blinken admits that that is preposterous. Let's take a listen.
There are two things. One is that, as the president said, and as we said in many conversations over the last couple of months, there has to be a credible plan for the civilians.
Have you seen a credible plan?
We have to make sure. We have not. Second, there's something else that's important. We also haven't seen a plan for what happens the day after this war in Gaza ends. Because right now, the trajectory that Israel is on is, even if it goes in and takes heavy action in Rafah, there will still be thousands of armed Hamas left. We've seen in areas that Israel has cleared, in the north, even in Khan Yunis, Hamas coming back. So the trajectory right now is that going into to Rafah, even to deal with these remaining battalions, especially in the absence of a plan for civilians, risks doing terrible harm to civilians and not solving the problem, a problem that both of us want to solve.
So there you go. Even the State Department saying, like, what the Israelis are selling is completely preposterous here in terms of their Rafah invasion. Now, will this administration actually do anything is a very open question, to be generous. We've already seen, similar like Weasley bullshit language from Biden. They have already done an invasion of Rafah. They've already told 300,000 Gazans that they have to move or else they're going to be bombed and killed. So this is quite a significant military invasion already, but Biden and co. still leaning on this language of, well, it hasn't been a major invasion, so we're not going to really do anything. And another thing, Saagar, I'm sure you probably saw this too, and some of like the big New York Times, propaganda piece about inside the Biden administration, blah, blah, blah. In that piece, they say even this, halting of the one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, it doesn't really matter. They have sufficient bombs to do whatever they want to do. They're still fully intending on shipping the entire, $14 billion in aid that was just passed that is more symbolic than it is actually meaningful to the Israelis' war effort. So important to keep that in mind as well.
Absolutely. No, very important. This entire thing is just a complete crapshoot. And it's just ridiculous, too, because, again, it's like the selective application of our own laws and the Israel exception means that all of it is fake. Let's put this up there on the screen. As we can see, The Intercept has a great headline, which is why we poked it. It says, Israel likely used U.S.-supplied weapons in violation of international law. That's okay, though, the State Department says.
It's a very accurate interpretation of this report.
It's true. It's like, well, so what's the point of the law? And if you can just fudge things, and words have meaning. Like, again, if Bucha was a massacre where that was 400 people who were dead. Now, one of the reasons I refused to call it a massacre at the time is because anybody who knows enough history knows that in a real war, a lot more people actually die. It was blown up as some genocidal event as to why the United States must pour every weapon that's not strapped, to the ground into Ukraine to stop these Russian monsters. Turns out it's a pretty run-of-the-mill, low-grade war, even if it is the largest one in Europe. It's like, well, what does a massacre actually look like? Well, we're watching it all happen. It's part of the reason why, it's so galling, the fact that we still continue to both buy into the Ukraine narrative while we're continuing to support Israel. The two don't fit at all. They're completely counter to each other. And the main reason is because of domestic politics in this country with a powerful Israel lobby. Let's put this up there on the screen. Krystal, do you want to read the email?
Oh my God. Okay, this is a billionaire backer, a major Democratic Party, like super funder, and has given tons of money to Biden. And so, Biden does little Weasley, like, oh, we may stop weapon shipments if there's a major invasion of Rafah. He wrote, and you really have to see this because it looks like something that would be posted from like an unhinged commenter in a YouTube section. Yeah. Like the capitalization and punctuation, everything about it is unhinged. Anyway, let me read you this. It says, "Dear President Biden, we, all caps, the U.S., as you stated numerous times, believe Hamas should be defeated. We, the U.S., in this case, you, Mr. President, have decided to stop sending munitions to Israel to achieve the goal that we/you have set up for Israel and ourselves. Even beyond Israel, this sends a terrible message to our allies in the region. And beyond that, we can flip from doing the right ting, you meant to say thing, to bending to political pressure. Let's not forget that there are more Jewish voters who care about Israel than Muslim voters that care about Hamas." Let that one sink in. Bad, 3 commas, bad, 3 commas, bad, 4 commas, decision, comma, on all levels. Please, PLS, reconsider. Thank you, with respect, Chaim. Okay, so there's a lot of elements of this that are important. First of all, like I said, imagine sending off this like unhinged screed to the President of the United States is just extraordinary in and of itself. Number 2, that line framing like, oh, there's more Jewish supporters of Israel than there are Muslim supporters of Hamas is so gross. It's so gross on every level. Because first of all, there are to conflate like, oh, if you're Muslim, you must support Hamas, and there's no other reason why you may be concerned about this is disgusting. Second of all, obviously, as we've seen, it's the problem for Biden with regard to his policy is vastly larger than just Muslim voters, by the way. So it's not only like racist, but also completely misunderstands the political calculation. But the most important thing, Saagar, is it just shows you like the level of access. It shows you the inside game. So even though this is just one person, his vote theoretically shouldn't matter more than mine or yours or any other ordinary person out there. Like, obviously, that's just not the case. He has so much direct line, direct connectivity. These are the types of voices that are in the ears, not just of Joe Biden, of Trump, of RFK Jr., of every single member of Congress, House and Senate. These are the type of people and the type of messaging that they're getting. And so that very skewed ecosystem and those incredibly skewed political incentives are how you end up with a policy that is so dissonant from the country at large and from the Democratic base in particular. So this guy going to the mat, throwing his weight around as a big Democratic mega donor to try to curb even the little minimal sort of like virtue signal change in policy direction that Biden did here. It's so naked and it's so incredibly gross.
No, it's crazy. I mean, he also literally was on the national board member of the Friends of the IDF. He served in the IDF. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's an Israeli citizen. Would you tolerate this from any other dual citizen group that would be using its influence and its wealth to guide U.S. foreign policy? I've made the comparison before. I am Indian, and if I saw a group of Indians trying to do this with respect to U.S. foreign policy, where it was clearly detrimental, I would call them out, even if it might theoretically help some of my distant relatives who are alive in India. For some reason, we have an exception here, and it's very obvious, that this is a serious, serious problem and a very powerful impact on U.S. foreign policy. So this is where it all comes from. Yeah. And these people, I will never underestimate their strength. I will never underestimate their ability to not just push U.S. foreign policy. I mean, this is a Hollywood financier, multi-billionaire. It's like, that's the forces that we're all up against.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Very, very clear.
And they can get on the phone with President Biden or
not
any other politician in the country, possibly the world, And so when you're confused about why, not just on Israel, but on any number of other issues, why our political class seems to be so diametrically opposed to what the people actually want, remember this email, because
it's true.
These are the waters that they're actually swimming in, and these are the type of people who actually have the most influence on policy.
Absolutely. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate you. Like I said, please join up breakingpoints.com. You're going to be the first to hear about our major announcement, even bigger than Counterpoints Friday, some people are saying. It is a 3-year anniversary coming up, which is crazy. So thank you to everybody who's been with us since day one, and we will see you all later.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.